Some folks carry a wound so deep they forget it's there, until a stranger walks in and presses right against it. This is a story about a young woman named Clara Mills, abandoned by her own parents for a superstition they chose to believe over their own blood. She answered a newspaper advertisement for a mail-order bride, traveled 1,100 miles to a town she'd never heard of, and stepped off a stagecoach into the life of a man the whole territory called the cruelest in the West. She did not know his name. She did not know his grief. All she knew was that nobody else was willing to walk toward him, and she did it anyway. The stagecoach driver dropped the wooden trunk into the dirt without looking back. Clara Mills stood alone on the main street of Copper Bend, Arizona Territory, red dust settling on the hem of her calico dress, the creased envelope in her hand damp from 1,100 miles of holding on. Nobody came out. She waited. The afternoon heat pressed flat against the storefronts. A gray-haired woman appeared in the doorway of the general store, wiped her hands on a flour-dusted apron, and read the name on the envelope Clara held up. The woman's face changed. She said only, "Wright Ranch is 6 miles south along the creek, but today you sit here." Half an hour passed. Clara sat on the store porch beside her trunk, watching the empty road, when a horse screamed. A red roan came tearing down the center of the street, saddle twisted, stirrups swinging wild. The rider hit the hitching rail in front of the blacksmith shop, shoulder first, and went down hard. Dust rose. Blood ran from a gash above his left eye into the dry earth. Townsfolk stepped out onto porches and into doorways 15, maybe 20, and formed a half circle in the road. Not one of them moved closer. Clara set the envelope on the trunk. She stepped off the porch. She crossed the open ground alone, knelt in the red dirt beside a man she had never seen, and pressed her torn apron to the wound on his forehead. His blood soaked through the cotton in 3 seconds. Behind her, the gray-haired woman gripped the door frame with both hands and said nothing. If you've ever known a place where kindness took more courage than a drawn pistol, we'd love to hear where you're watching from today. Drop your hometown in the comments. And know you're among good company here. The gash ran from his left eyebrow to the hairline 3 inches, maybe 4. The edges ragged where skin had split against wood. Clara pressed the folded cloth to it and felt the wound pulse beneath her fingers. Warm, steady. He was alive. "Help me get him inside," she said. The gray-haired woman did not move for a moment. Then she tucked the broom against the wall and came down the steps. Between them, they dragged him through the store, past shelves of canned peaches and tobacco tins, into a back room that smelled of lye soap and old wool. A narrow bed, a single window. They laid him down, and his boot heel knocked the iron frame, and the whole bed rang like a dull bell. Clara tore the hem of her apron. The cloth came apart in a long strip. She dipped it in the basin the older woman set on the stool, water lukewarm, faintly brown, and cleaned the wound. Grit came away first, then dried blood, dark and flaking. The cut beneath was clean enough, deep, but clean. His left shoulder was swelling fast where it had struck the rail, badly bruised. Maybe worse, and when she pressed the ribs on that side, he flinched in his half-sleep, his whole body pulling away from her hand. His eyes opened. Gray, pale gray, like river stone. His hand came up fast, his fingers closing around her wrist. Grip hard enough that the bones in her forearm shifted. "Get off me!" His voice was low and dry and carried no question in it. Clara did not pull away. She held the wet cloth steady an inch from his forehead. "You have dirt in this cut. It will fester if I don't clean it." He stared at her. The grip tightened, then released. His hand dropped to the mattress, and his eyes closed again. Jaw set, like a man swallowing something he refused to let out. She finished cleaning the gash, pressed a dry strip against it, and held it there until the bleeding slowed. His breathing evened, not sleep, but something close to surrender. The older woman stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "You have steady hands," she said, "for a girl who just stepped off a stage." Clara wrung the cloth over the basin. The water turned pink. "I have cleaned worse." "I expect you have." The woman paused. "I'm Maggie Hayworth. I own this store." She tilted her head toward the man on the bed. "You know who that is?" Clara shook her head. Maggie's mouth pressed into a line. She looked at the man, then back at Clara, and something shifted behind her eyes, not pity. Not exactly, but something close to it. "That's Nathan Wright," she said. "And you, I'm guessing, are the wife he sent for." Maggie's wagon had a cracked axle that groaned with every rut. Clara held the reins loose and let the mule find its own footing along the dry creek bed. 6 miles of red dirt and mesquite and heat that sat on her chest like a stone. Nathan had left the store at first light. 2 days after the accident, his left shoulder bound tight against his ribs with strips of flour sacking, moving like a man held together by wire and stubbornness. He had not said goodbye. He had stopped in the doorway, not turning around, and said, "Ranch needs a cook. You know the way along the creek." Not an invitation, not a question. He walked out, and the door swung shut behind him, and that was all. Maggie had pressed a bundle of cornmeal and salt pork into Clara's hands and said nothing for a long moment. Then, "The road follows the creek south. When you see the cottonwood with the split trunk, turn west. 1/4 mile after that." She paused. "Leave the wagon at the ranch. I'll send my boy for it when I need it. Or you drive it back when you come for supplies. Either way." Now the split cottonwood rose ahead, dead on one side, green on the other, and Clara turned the mule west. The wagon rocked through tall grass, brown and stiff, and the ranch appeared in pieces. First the fence, leaning in places, then the barn, its roof pitched at an angle that suggested one good storm might finish it. Beyond the barn, a scatter of cattle moved along the far fence line, 8 or 10 head, hard to count in the shimmer of heat, their brown hides blending with the dried grass. Then the cabin, log walls, a porch with a single chair. No curtains in the windows, no flowers in the yard, everything squared and clean, and empty, the table inside, visible through the open door. Scrubbed pale, bare. A hook on the wall near the stove held nothing but a nail. The window ledge held nothing. A single plate sat on the shelf beside one tin cup. 1 fork, 1 knife. The whole place had been stripped to its bones, not by poverty, but by intention. Someone had removed everything that was not necessary and left only what a man needed to get through a day without being reminded of the days before. Clara climbed down. Her boots hit packed dirt. She left the trunk on the wagon and walked up the 2 porch steps and through the door. The kitchen smelled of cold ash and lye, a cast-iron stove, its surface seasoned black. A water bucket with a tin dipper. The table, white oak. Hand-planed, big enough for 4 but set with 1 plate and 1 fork. And in the far corner, on a chair too big for him, a boy, small, 5 maybe, but brown hair that hadn't seen a comb in days, sticking up at the crown. A cotton shirt cut down from something larger, the sleeves rolled 3 times and still past his wrists. Suspenders hanging loose off narrow shoulders. the clips too wide for his waistband. His feet hung above the floor. He did not swing them. He looked at Clara, did not blink, did not move. His eyes were gray, the same pale gray as the man in the back room of Maggie's store. And they held the same flat steadiness, a gaze that gave nothing and asked for nothing. Clara lowered herself until her knees touched the floor, eye level. She could see a smear of dried food on his chin, a scratch on the back of his left hand, half healed. "I'm Clara," she said. "I'll be staying here a while." The boy looked at her, through her, past her. His mouth stayed shut. Then Clara saw it on the table. Next to the empty plate, a small white pebble, smooth, round, placed there with intention, not dropped by accident. It sat in the exact center of the space, between the plate and the table's edge. She did not touch it. Behind her, boots crossed the porch. Nathan's shadow passed the window and kept going toward the barn, without stopping, without a word about the boy or the pebble or the woman, now kneeling on his kitchen floor. She heard him grunt as he lifted something a feed bucket. From the sound and the grunt carried a hitch in it. His bruised ribs needs catching. Clara stood. She looked at the boy again. He had not moved, but his eyes had shifted, no longer looking through her, looking at her, briefly, then away. She found the stove, found matches in a tin box on the shelf, struck one and held it to the kindling already stacked inside dry grass. Cedar shavings, placed there by hands too small to have done it carelessly. Eli had built this fire. He had been waiting for someone to light it. The flame caught. The stove ticked as the iron warmed. Clara pumped water, filled the coffee pot, and set it on the heat. The evening came slow and amber. Clara stood in the doorway. Nathan sat on the single porch chair, facing the valley, hat on his knee. He had unwound the flour-sacking bandage from his shoulder, and it lay in a loose coil on the porch boards beside his boots. His left arm hung careful and still at his side. He did not look at her. "You cook, you wash, that's it." Crickets starting up in the dry grass, a hawk circling far out over the mesa, riding the last thermal of the day. "And don't make promises to the boy." His voice dropped. "He doesn't need another person making promises and then leaving." Clara leaned against the doorframe. The wood was warm from the day's heat. Behind her, the stove ticked, the coffee pot hissed. Somewhere inside the cabin, a chair scraped the floor small, careful, barely audible, and she knew the boy had moved closer to the kitchen. "I'm not making promises," she said. "I'm just here." Nathan did not answer, did not turn. The hawk dropped below the mesa line and was gone. Clara looked back into the cabin. On the window ledge above the stove, where there had been nothing an hour ago, a second white pebble sat beside the first. The first morning, Clara made cornbread. She mixed the meal with water and a pinch of salt pork grease in the only bowl she could find tin, dented at the rim, and poured the batter into the cast-iron skillet already seasoned black from years of use. The stove was hot. The bread took 12 minutes. She knew by the smell when the edges went from wet grain to something toasted and faintly sweet. It was done. She set the skillet on the table with a folded rag beneath it, cut 3 squares, put one on each plate, Nathan's, Eli's, and the plate she had found on the top shelf, the one with a chip on the edge that someone had pushed to the back and forgotten. Nathan came in from the barn. He moved easier today than yesterday, still favoring the left side, but no longer holding his arm pinned against his ribs. The bruise had gone from red to a deep purple that showed at his collar when he bent. He sat, ate without looking up. His fork scraped the plate twice, and then he was gone. The door swinging behind him, Clara looked at his plate. Clean. Eli sat in his corner. He picked the cornbread apart with his fingers, small pieces, deliberate, like a bird pulling its seed. He ate every crumb. Then he set his hands flat on the table and looked at the empty plate, as though confirming something to himself. He slid off the chair and walked to the far side of the kitchen, near the stove, and sat on the floor with his back against the wall. Closer than the corner. Not by much, but closer. The second day. Clara washed clothes. She found Nathan's shirts in a pile near the back door, 3 of them, stiff with dried sweat and dust. The cotton so worn at the collars that the threads showed. She scrubbed them against the washboard in the yard, knuckles going red in the lye water, and hung them on the line strung between the porch post and the cottonwood stump. The rope sagged in the middle. She tied it tighter. Eli watched from the barn door, beyond him, out past the corral fence. The cattle stood in a loose cluster near the water trough, 8 or 9 brown shapes, switching flies in the heat. One of them lowed, a long, low sound that carried across the yard and faded into the sage. Clara started humming an old tune, something her mother used to sing while shelling peas on the back step in Ohio. The words half gone, just the melody left. Eli came out of the barn's shadow and sat on an overturned bucket 10 feet from the washboard. He did not speak. He pulled at a loose thread on his shirt cuff and watched her hands move. The third day. She found the pebbles, 2 white stones on the back step, side by side, placed with the kind of care that left no doubt. Not tossed, not dropped, set there. Clara crouched and looked at them. Smooth, creek-washed. No bigger than the pad of her thumb. She looked up. Eli stood at the corner of the barn, one hand on the rough timber, watching her. Their eyes met. He turned and disappeared around the side. Clara picked up the pebbles, carried them inside, set them on the window ledge above the stove, where the morning sun came through strongest. They caught the light and held it. That afternoon, she did not hum. She sang low, under her breath, just loud enough to carry through the open window while she peeled potatoes into a bucket. She did not know all the verses. She made up words where the memory failed and kept the melody steady. And when she looked up, Eli was sitting on the kitchen floor again, not in the far corner, by the stove, close enough that she could have reached out and touched the top of his head. She did not reach out. She peeled another potato. He stayed. Nathan came in late, after dark, smelling of horse sweat and hay. He rolled his left shoulder as he sat testing it, the way a man tests a fence post to see if it will hold, and the motion came easier than it had a week ago. He ate the stew she had made potatoes, salt pork, a can of tomatoes from the shelf, and when he finished he looked at the window ledge, at the 2 white pebbles sitting there in a line. His hand paused on his coffee cup. Then he drained it, set it down, and went to the porch without a word. Friday. Maggie came. Her wagon announced itself a 1/4 mile out the bad axle. The mule's slow clop, the rattle of jars. She brought an apple pie wrapped in a flour sack cloth and a small bag of sugar, and a look on her face that Clara was beginning to recognize as the way Maggie looked when she was working up to something. They sat at the kitchen table. Maggie held her coffee cup in both hands and looked out the window at the yard, where Eli sat on the overturned bucket. 3 feet from the porch step where Clara had been mending a sock before the wagon appeared. Lord have mercy. Maggie shook her head slowly. She blew on her coffee. 2 years I've been hauling pie up this road. 2 years. That boy would take the plate from me at the door, not the doorway. Mind you, the door. Like there was a line painted on the ground, he wouldn't let me cross and carry it to the table and eat it alone. Wouldn't sit with me, wouldn't look at me longer than a dog looks at a stranger. She set the cup down. Now he's sitting out there, in the open, near a person. She turned to Clara. What did you do? Clara folded the mending in her lap. Nothing. Nothing. Maggie repeated the word like she was tasting it. She picked up her coffee again. Well, that's about right. Nothing is exactly what that child needed somebody to do. Just be there. Still waters. That man and his boy. Still waters. She drank. Harder than people think. Doing nothing right. From outside, the sound of boots on dirt. Nathan crossed the yard from the barn, a broken bridle strap in one hand. He passed Eli on the bucket. Did not speak, but his stride shortened as he went by 1/2 step slower, the way a man moves when he is aware of something small and breakable near his feet. And then he was on the porch and through the door and past them without stopping. Maggie watched him go. She looked at Clara. That man just slowed down for his own son, she said quietly. I haven't seen him do that since Ellen. Clara said nothing. She picked up the sock and pushed the needle through. That night, after Maggie's wagon had rattled back down the creek road and the dishes were washed and the stove banked for morning, Clara stepped onto the back porch to shake out the dish towel. The air smelled of cooling dust and sage, stars thick overhead. From inside, a small sound, a chair dragging across the wood floor. Then silence. Then the creak of the bed in Eli's room. Clara went to the window ledge. In the last light from the stove's embers, she counted the pebbles, 3, and from the barn, where Nathan should have been bedding down the horses, she heard something she had not heard in the week she had been here. A sound so faint, she almost missed it beneath the crickets. He was talking, low, steady, the words indistinct. Not to the horses. The rhythm was wrong for that, too halting, too careful, with long pauses between phrases. He was talking the way a man talks when he is trying to say something he has not said in a very long time. Practicing the words where no one can hear, Nathan woke to light where there should not have been light. A thin line of it, amber and low, leaked from beneath Eli's door across the hallway. The coal oil lamp. Nathan lay still and listened. No sound from the boy's room, no crying, no thrashing, just the lamp burning at 2 in the morning when it should have been dark. He pushed the blanket off and stood. The floorboards were cool under his bare feet. He crossed the hall in 3 steps and stopped at the gap where the door hung an inch open. Clara sat on the floor beside Eli's bed, her back against the wall, her legs drawn up, her head tilted to the side with her eyes closed. The lamp on the bedside crate turned low, the flame barely moving behind the smoked glass. Eli lay on his side facing her, one arm hanging off the mattress. His small fingers hooked into the fabric of her sleeve, just above the wrist, holding on. Even in sleep. Holding on. Nathan's hand found the doorframe. His fingers pressed into the grain until the wood bit back. Ellen used to sit there, same wall, same angle. She would lean her head against the logs and make a sound, not quite a song, not quite a hum, something low that filled the room without effort. He could not remember the sound exactly anymore. He remembered the shape of it, the way it made the dark feel smaller, and her hair falling across her shoulder, and Eli reaching for it, wrapping a strand around his finger, the way a child holds a string tied to something he is afraid will float away. 2 years. The wall had not changed. The bed had not moved. The lamp was the same lamp. Nathan stepped back from the door. The hallway was dark. He went to his room and sat on the edge of the mattress and did not lie down again. The well rope creaked in the early light. Clara had the handle turning when Nathan came around the side of the cabin, shirt untucked, boots unlaced. He had not slept. His eyes felt packed with sand, and the muscles in his neck held a wire-tight tension that ran from the base of his skull down between his shoulder blades. She looked up. He looked at her, straight on. For the first time since the back room of Maggie's store, not past her, not through her, but at her. Her face was drawn, shadows under her eyes dark as bruises, a crease on her left cheek from the log wall she had slept against. "You were up all night," he said. Clara hauled the bucket up, hand over hand. The rope squealed against the wooden roller. Water sloshed over the rim and darkened the stones at her feet. "He had a nightmare, woke up shaking. I sat with him until he settled." "What did he say?" She set the bucket on the well's edge, wiped her hands on her apron. "He called out for someone. I couldn't make out the name. Just a sound like he was trying to say something, but the word got stuck halfway." Nathan looked at the ground between his boots. A red ant crawled over a pebble and disappeared into a crack in the dry earth. "He was calling for his mother." The words came out flat, like something read from a page. His right hand rested on the stone rim of the well, and the grit pressed into his palm, the rock still holding the night's coolness. Clara picked up the bucket by its rope handle, water swaying, and walked past him toward the kitchen door. Her sleeve brushed his arm. She did not stop. She did not say she was sorry. He was glad she didn't. The afternoon was hot and still, the kind of heat that pressed the smell of sage and dry grass flat against the ground. Nathan had taken the roan out to check the fence line along the south pasture, 3 posts down from the last storm, wires sagging into the dirt. He worked the post-hole digger with his right arm, doing most of the pulling, his left shoulder protesting each time he braced the handles apart. After the 4th hole, he stopped, sat on the broken rail, and pressed the heel of his hand against his ribs, where the bruise had faded to a sick yellow-green but still sent a deep ache through his side when he twisted wrong. He sat there long enough for the roan to drop its head and nose at the dry grass. Then he stood and finished the 5th hole and tamped the post in with the flat of the shovel. He came back along the creek road with the sun dropping behind the mesa, the roan moving slow and easy, and he saw it from 200 yards out, the quilt. It hung on the clothesline between the porch post and the cottonwood stump, moving in the small wind that came up the valley every evening around this time, blue calico with white edging. The fabric faded in places, the center squares lighter than the border, bleached from the years it had lain across their bed, Ellen's bed, their bed. Nathan reined the roan to a stop. He could see the stitching from here, or maybe he only thought he could, because he knew it so well. The small, tight cross-stitches Ellen had learned from her mother in Kentucky. The corner where the thread changed color because she had run out of blue and used white for the last 4 inches. And the burn mark, bottom right, shaped like a half-moon from a night he remembered only in pieces now. The smell of the stove, her laugh, the way she had held up her hand afterward, or had she? He thought she had. The details were going soft at the edges, the way things do when you hold them too long. The quilt moved in the wind. The burn mark turned and disappeared and came back again. Clara had found it. She had not asked, had not mentioned Ellen or the trunk at the foot of Nathan's bed, where the quilt had been folded for 2 years under a wool blanket. He never moved. She had taken it out. washed it gently. He could tell, because the calico had not frayed further at the worn spots and hung it in the sun to dry. Not to replace anything, not to claim anything, just to let it breathe again. Nathan sat on the roan for a long time. The wind moved the quilt. The sun dropped another inch. A meadowlark called from the fence line he had just repaired. 2 sharp notes and a trill. He dismounted and led the horse to the barn. That night, the quilt lay on Eli's bed. Nathan had carried it in from the line after dark, when Clara was washing dishes and the boy was already asleep. He unfolded it and spread it over the thin cotton blanket and smoothed the edges down. The burn mark fell near the bottom right, just as it always had. He pressed his thumb against it. The fabric was soft and clean and smelled of soap and sunlight and faint, almost gone lavender. He pulled his hand away, stood, left the room. In the hallway, he passed Clara. She carried a pitcher of water toward her room, the small room off the kitchen that had been a storeroom before she came. Their eyes met. She looked at his hands. He looked at hers. Neither spoke. But the next morning, when Nathan passed Eli's open door on the way to the kitchen, he stopped. The boy was still asleep. The quilt was pulled up to his chin, bunched in both fists, and his face, for the first time in longer than Nathan could measure, was smooth. The crease between his small eyebrows that had been there for 2 years, that furrow that made him look like a worried old man in a child's body, was gone. Nathan stood in the doorway until the coffee pot began to hiss in the kitchen. Then he smelled it cornbread in the oven, coffee on the stove, and something else beneath it. Something he could not name, but that made the hallway feel narrower. As though the house itself had drawn a breath and was holding it, waiting to see what he would do next. 3 weeks since the stagecoach. 3 weeks since she had knelt in the dirt beside a man she did not know and pressed a cloth to his bleeding head, while the rest of the town stood back. Clara counted the days sometimes, not on purpose, but the way a person counts steps on an unfamiliar road to know how far she had come from the place she started. Sunday morning, she laid out Eli's clean shirt on the bed, the one she had washed twice to get the range dust out of the collar, the cotton still holding the smell of lye soap and sun. She knelt on the floor and the boy stood in front of her, arms at his sides, while she worked the buttons up from his belly to his throat. Her fingers moved slow and steady. His chest rose and fell beneath the fabric. She reached for the suspenders, slid one strap over his left shoulder, then his right, and hooked them to the waistband of his trousers. He did not flinch, did not pull away. He stood still and let her hands adjust the straps, tightening the left one, which was longer, so that the clips sat even on both sides. Then the hair. She dipped the comb in the water basin and drew it through the tangles at the crown of his head. The teeth caught. She worked them free, careful, angling the comb so it pulled against the knot and not the scalp. Eli's head tilted with each stroke. He did not reach up to stop her. A small sound came from his throat. Not a word, not even close to a word, just a hum, a vibration, the sound a child makes when something feels familiar and he cannot remember why. Nathan stood in the hall doorway, hat in his right hand, the brim turning slowly between his fingers. He did not step into the room. The 3 of them rode the wagon to Copper Bend. The bench seat was built for 2. Clara sat on the left. Nathan drove on the right. Eli sat between them, his shoulder touching Clara's arm each time the wagon dipped through a rut. He did not move away from the contact. By the time they reached the church road, he had stopped shifting his weight. The white clapboard church sat at the north end of the main street, its single bell tower casting a short shadow in the late morning sun. The bell was ringing a flat, unmusical sound, the clapper hitting slightly off-center the way it had for years, according to Maggie, who complained about it every Sunday and never once suggested it be fixed. Nathan pulled the wagon to the hitching rail. People turned. Two women standing near the church steps stopped mid-conversation. The blacksmith, who had been leaning against the water trough rolling a cigarette, looked up and forgot to lick the paper. Nathan Wright. At church, for the first time in 2 years, and beside him, the woman from the stagecoach. Inside, the pews were pine, worn smooth and dark by decades of sitting. Clara took a seat near the back with Eli pressed against her side. Nathan sat on the boy's other side, his hat on his knee, his jaw set forward, his eyes fixed on the window behind the pulpit where a crack in the glass sent a thin line of light across the preacher's left shoulder. Maggie caught Clara's eye from 2 rows ahead, a single nod, nothing more, after the service. The congregation gathered in the dirt yard between the church and the cemetery fence, women in calico and gingham, men in their one clean shirt, children pulling at collars and kicking dust. 2 women approached Clara, the wife of the man who ran the feed store, and an older woman Clara did not recognize. They asked where she was from. Clara said Ohio. They asked about the journey. She said it was long. They waited for more. She did not give it. Orville Fenton appeared at Nathan's elbow. He was a narrow man, narrow shoulders, narrow face, a vest buttoned tight over a linen shirt, pressed so sharp Clara could see the iron creases from 10 feet away. He extended his hand and Nathan shook it the way a man shakes a hand he has no use for, but cannot refuse in a churchyard. "Mrs. Wright, is it?" Fenton said, turning to Clara. His smile pulled at the corners, but did not reach much farther. "Ohio, I hear. I have acquaintances in that part of the country. Whereabouts, if you don't mind, west of Columbus," Clara said. "Small town. You wouldn't know it. Try me." The smile held. "I have a long memory for towns." Nathan took Eli's hand. The boy did not resist and walked to the wagon without answering Fenton, without looking back. Clara followed. Fenton watched them go, his head tilted slightly to the right, the way a man tilts his head when he is filing something away for later. The ride home was quiet. The wagon creaked. A red-tailed hawk traced circles above the mesa. Eli sat between them, and his hand rested on the bench next to Clara's, not touching, but close, the width of a finger. At the ranch, Nathan went to the barn to fill the water trough. Clara sat on the porch step with the mending basket, Eli's socks, both pairs, the heels worn through. She threaded the needle and began to work, pulling the yarn across the hole in small, tight stitches, the way her mother had taught her before her mother stopped teaching her anything at all. Eli had gone to the yard. She could hear him, or rather she could hear the absence of him, the particular quiet that meant he was somewhere nearby, being still. Then the crunch of small boots on dry ground, coming closer. She looked up. He stood in front of her, 3 feet away. His right hand hung at his side, and in it he held a flower yellow, bright against his dusty fingers. The petals slightly ragged at the edges, desert marigold, the kind that pushed up through cracked ground after the August rains. He held it out. Clara set the mending down on the step beside her. The needle caught the light. She reached and took the flower from his hand. The stem was warm from his grip. A grain of red dirt fell from the roots onto her palm. Then Eli opened his mouth. His lips parted, and his throat worked a small contraction, visible beneath the skin, the muscles remembering a motion they had not made in a very long time. The sound came out rough and low, the edges frayed, like a hinge forced open after years of rust. "Mama!" Clara's hand closed around the stem. The petals touched her wrist. Her other hand was still raised, open. Where it had taken the flower, she did not lower it. She could not. A pressure built behind her eyes and in her chest and along the backs of her arms, not thought, not decision. Something older and lower, something the body does before the mind can catch it. She pulled him in, her arms around his shoulders, his face against her collarbone, his hair under her chin, the flower crushed between them. She pressed her mouth against the top of his head and breathed in dust. Soap, little boy sweat, sun-warmed cotton, and her throat locked shut. Eli's hands came up, small fists gripping the back of her dress, holding on, the way he had held her sleeve in his sleep. But awake now, choosing it. In the barn, Nathan had been working the hand pump. The iron handle went up and down in a steady rhythm squeal. Gush, squeal, gush, and then it stopped. His hand stayed on the handle. His body went still. He had heard. The pail sat at his feet, half full. He released the pump handle, and it swung loose with a metallic groan. He picked up the pail and set it on the ledge near the stall door. Carefully, the way a man sets something down when his hands are no longer reliable. Then he walked to the back of the barn, where the hay was stacked against the wall. He sat on a bale, put his elbows on his knees, lowered his head. The hay was dry and sharp against his forearms. A horse shifted in the nearest stall, nuzzling the feed bag. A fly buzzed against the window glass in a mindless circle. He sat there a long time. When he came back to the cabin, the sun was low and Clara was in the kitchen and Eli was on the floor beside the stove with a stick, drawing lines in a patch of flour that had spilled from the sack. The yellow flour sat in a tin cup of water on the window ledge between the 3 white pebbles. Nathan poured himself coffee, stood at the counter, drank it, set the cup down. "Fenton," he said. Clara looked up from the stove. She was stirring beans. The wooden spoon paused. "He'll write letters," Nathan said. "That's what he does, writes letters and asks questions, and doesn't stop until he finds what he's looking for." He looked at her across the kitchen, and for the first time his eyes held something that was not distance or refusal or the flat gray wall he had kept between himself and every living thing in Copper Bend. "Is there something he's going to find?" Clara's hand tightened on the spoon. The beans bubbled. Steam rose between them. She did not answer. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, 2 days after the service. Orville Fenton sorted the mail every morning at the counter in the back of the post office, which was also the back of the bank, which was also a desk and a brass scale and a rack of wooden cubbyholes nailed to the wall. He worked through the stack with the efficiency of a man who believed that information was currency, and currency was his business. 3 letters for the feed store, a seed catalog for the widow Perkins, a note from the territorial assessor, and an envelope, cream-colored, postmarked Ridgemont, Ohio, addressed in a careful hand to the postmaster or person of authority. Copper Bend, Arizona Territory. Orville turned the envelope over. No return name on the back, only a small cross printed in the corner, the kind a clergyman might use in place of a seal. He slit the flap with his letter opener, bone-handled. The blade dulled from years of paper and unfolded the single page inside. The handwriting was neat, slanted slightly forward. the ink brown rather than black. The letter identified its author as Reverend Harlan Webb of the First Congregational Church of Ridgemont, Ohio. It stated that he was writing on behalf of Mr. and Mrs. Ansel Mills, who were seeking information regarding their daughter, Clara, age 23, who had departed the family home without notice some months prior. The Reverend wished to inform any person of standing in Copper Bend that the Mills family had suffered 2 consecutive crop failures and that the community of Ridgemont had come to associate these misfortunes with the daughter, whose presence was considered. The handwriting tightened here. The pen pressed harder, inauspicious. The parents wished only to confirm her whereabouts. They did not wish her return. Orville read the letter twice. He folded it along its original creases, slid it into the inside pocket of his vest, and buttoned the pocket shut. Thursday evening. The town council met in the room above the feed store, 6 men around a table with a kerosene lamp and a pitcher of water nobody drank. The meeting concerned the repair of the bridge over Copper Creek, which had lost 2 planks in the August flood. Orville waited until the bridge discussion concluded, and the men were pushing back their chairs. "Unrelated matter," he said, adjusting his cuffs. "Probably nothing, but I received a letter this week from a minister in Ohio regarding the young woman out at the right place." He paused. Let the pause do its work. "It seems the Mills family, that's her people, had some difficulties. 2 harvests lost, and the community there, well," another pause. "They came to a certain conclusion about the daughter. The parents themselves asked her to leave." He did not say the word jinx. He did not say cursed or unlucky. He did not need to. The men looked at each other across the table, and the lamp flame bent sideways in a draft from the window and straightened again. By Saturday, the information had moved through the town the way it always moved, not through announcement, but through accumulation. A word at the mercantile counter, a lowered voice between 2 women hanging laundry. Each retelling changed a little. A word added here, a fact dropped there, always in one direction. Clara Wright, if that was even her proper name, had been cast out by her own parents. The family was cursed. 2 harvests gone. And since her arrival in Copper Bend, Nathan's horse had thrown him. The August heat had been the worst in memory. The Perkins well had dropped 3 feet. People did not say they believed in such things. They said it makes you wonder, and I'm not superstitious. But, and you have to ask yourself, which amounted to the same thing. Clara went to the general store on Saturday afternoon for flour. She carried an empty sack folded under her arm and 2 coins. Nathan had left on the kitchen table without explanation. The walk from the wagon to the store took her past the church, and it was there between the church steps and the cemetery fence, in the strip of shade where the women gathered, that she heard them. 2 voices. She recognized neither. She had stopped at the corner of the building to shake a pebble from her boot, and the voices came through the gap between the church wall and the woodpile. Her own parents, imagine that. Your own blood, sending you away. Well, Mabel said Fenton had a letter from a pastor. Apparently the whole town back there wanted nothing to do with her, and she just shows up here and moves right in like she belongs, playing mother to that boy. That poor child. Hasn't he been through enough without some jinx woman? Clara's fingers stopped on the boot lace. The pebble was still there, pressing into the arch of her foot. She did not remove it. 2 crops dead in Ohio. Now the Perkins well drying up. I'm not one to say there's a connection. Of course not. But you do wonder. Clara stood. The pebble ground into the ball of her foot, and she let it. She walked to the store. Her face was hot. Not from the sun, from something lower, something in the gut, the same heat she had felt the morning her father set the carpet bag by the kitchen door and went back to his coffee without looking up. The same heat she had felt standing in the yard in Ridgemont, while the neighbor women watched from their porches, and none of them came down the steps. Maggie measured the flour on the scale. She looked at Clara's face and opened her mouth, and then closed it again, and tied the sack with twine without speaking. Clara loaded the flour onto the wagon. She climbed up, took the reins. Her hands were steady, her back was straight. She drove out of town without looking at anyone, and the straightness of her back and the steadiness of her hands cost her something that she measured in the ache behind her sternum and the salt taste at the back of her throat that she swallowed and would not let rise. She made supper. Nathan ate. Eli ate. She washed the plates and set them on the shelf and wiped the table and wrung the rag and hung it on the stove handle. Then the light was gone and the cabin was dark, and she sat in the kitchen without lighting the lamp. The chair was hard beneath her. The stove ticked as it cooled. She had traveled 1,100 miles, changed her name on a letter, climbed into a stagecoach with a trunk that held everything she owned: 2 dresses, a comb, her mother's sewing needles that her mother had not asked for back, and the advertisement she had cut from the newspaper with a kitchen knife because the scissors were not hers to use anymore. 1,100 miles, and the same word had followed her here: inauspicious. She could taste it. It tasted like that kitchen in Ridgemont, the cold coffee, the closed door, her father's back. It tasted like the yard where she had stood with the carpet bag and waited for someone to say stay, and no one did. And now it tasted like Copper Bend, like flour dust and church shade, and 2 women who did not know her deciding what she was. Her hand moved across the table in the dark, found the window ledge, found the pebbles, 3 of them, in a row, smooth under her fingertip. She touched the middle one, rolled it a quarter turn. The trunk sat in the corner of her room. She had never fully unpacked it. The lid was closed, but not latched. It never was, and in the dark, it was just a shape. A block of black against the wall, ready to be picked up and carried to the next place that would not keep her. She sat with her finger on the pebble. She did not stand up. She did not open the trunk. She did not light the lamp. From the hallway, a sound, small bare feet on the floorboards, the creak of a door hinge. Eli appeared in the kitchen doorway, the quilt wrapped around his shoulders like a shawl, trailing behind him on the floor. He stood there half asleep, eyes barely open, looking at her in the dark. He crossed the room, climbed into the chair beside hers, pulled the quilt tighter, leaned his head against her arm. Within a minute, his breathing was slow and even. Clara looked down at the top of his head, at the quilt with its half-moon burn mark, at her own hands on the table. In the morning, she would have to face it. Nathan's question, is there something he's going to find, and the answer she had not given, which the whole town had now given for her. And when he heard what they were saying, he would do what her father had done, what everyone had done: set the bag by the door, go back to his coffee. She reached down and pulled the edge of the quilt up over Eli's shoulder where it had slipped. The fabric was soft under her fingers. It smelled of lavender and soap, and a woman she had never met, who had stitched it by a stove in this same kitchen, in this same dark, years before Clara had ever heard the name right. Outside, the crickets; inside, the boys breathing, and in the corner of her room, the trunk lid closed, unlatched, waiting. Nathan woke to the smell of coffee that was already cold, not the sharp, rising scent of grounds hitting hot water. This was flat, stale, coffee that had been made and left to sit on the stove without being poured. He swung his legs off the bed. The floorboards were cool. The window showed a sky not yet fully light gray at the edges. The mesa, a black cutout. He pulled on his boots without lacing them and walked down the hall to the kitchen. The stove was warm, but not hot. The coffee pot sat on the back burner. The handle turned to the left. Clara always turned it to the right, toward the wall, so Eli wouldn't grab it. The table had been wiped clean, the dish towel that hung folded on the stove handle, squared and even. The way a person folds something when they are not coming back to use it again. On the window ledge, the 3 white pebbles sat in their row. Beneath them, held in place by their weight, a piece of paper. Nathan crossed the kitchen in 2 strides. He lifted the pebbles one at a time and set them aside. The paper was torn from the brown wrapping she used for bread, rough at the edges, written in pencil. The letters small and careful. "I am sorry. I should have told you from the start. Take care of Eli. He deserves better than what I bring." Nathan read it once. Read it again. The pencil marks were faint in places, where her hand had pressed too lightly, as though the words were trying to disappear even as she wrote them. He looked up, through the kitchen window, past the porch. Down the road that ran along the dry creek, Maggie's wagon moved south toward town, small in the distance. The mule's pace unhurried. The figure on the bench sitting straight and alone. The dust it raised hung in the still air behind it. A sound from the hallway. Nathan turned. Eli stood in the door of his room. The quilt was on the floor behind him, dropped or dragged. The blue calico trailing across the threshold. He wore his nightshirt. His feet were bare on the cold boards. His hands hung at his sides, and his fingers gripped the fabric at his thighs, twisting it, bunching it, his knuckles white. He was not looking at Nathan. He was looking past him at the kitchen, at the table, at the window ledge where the pebbles sat displaced from their positions, at the empty room. The boy's mouth opened, closed, his chin pulled down and his throat worked, and no sound came out. Nathan looked at his son, at the paper in his own hand, at the wagon growing smaller on the creek road. He knelt, one knee on the floor, eye level with the boy. He put his hand on Eli's shoulder the first time he had touched him in longer than he could account for, and the smallness of the bone beneath his palm sent something through his chest that he did not have a word for. "Stay on the porch," he said. "Right on the step. Don't go near the well. Don't go near the barn. I'll be back before the sun clears the mesa. You hear me?" Eli looked at him. Those gray eyes, steady and old. Nathan squeezed the shoulder once, stood, took his hat from the hook by the door, walked to the barn, saddled the roan in under 2 minutes cinch, breast collar, bridle his fingers working from memory while his mind was already on the road. The wagon had a 20-minute lead. The mule was slow. The roan was not. He rode south along the creek bed. The hooves struck hard-packed dirt, and the sound carried flat across the empty land. The sun was clearing the mesa, long shadows pulling west, and he could see the wagon ahead a quarter mile, closing the mule, plodding, the wheels cutting tracks in the red dust. He pushed the roan to a lope and pulled alongside, and the mule startled sideways, and Clara hauled the reins and the wagon lurched to a stop at an angle across the road. She looked at him, her face drawn tight, eyes dry. The trunk sat behind her on the wagon bed, latched. "Go back to the house," she said. "Eli shouldn't be alone. He's on the porch. He knows to stay put." Nathan, I don't care what they believe. The words came out rough, unplanned, like a nail pulled from green wood. The roan shifted beneath him, picking up the tension. Nathan steadied the horse with his knees. Clara stared at him. You don't know what they're saying. I know what Fenton is. I've known him 12 years. They're saying I'm a curse, that I ruined my family and I'll ruin yours. And maybe... She stopped. Her hands tightened on the reins and the leather creaked. Maybe they're not wrong. 2 harvests died while I was in that house. My father's barn leaked every year I lived under his roof. And your horse spooked at a rattlesnake. I saw the snake. There's no mystery in it. It doesn't matter what you saw. It matters what they know. He cut her off. Not loud. Flat. It doesn't. Clara's jaw tightened. The reins were still taut in her hands. A bead of sweat ran from her temple to her jaw and fell onto her collar. Turn the wagon around, Nathan said. Come home. It's not my home. It wasn't. Now it is. You said I was just the cook. I know what I said. You said, don't make promises to your son. I know what I said. Clara. She flinched at the name. He had never used it before, not once in the weeks she had been on his land, eating at his table, sleeping in the room off his kitchen. She had been you and her, and once, to Maggie, the one who came on the stage, never Clara. Nathan dismounted, looped the roan's reins around the wagon brake handle, climbed up onto the bench beside her, took the reins from her hands. She let them go, not easily, but she let them go. He turned the mule north, toward town. Copper Bend's main street was awake. The blacksmith had his forge lit. The smell of hot iron in the morning air. Maggie was unlocking the store, key in hand, shading her eyes as the right wagon came up the road. Nathan pulled the mule to a stop in front of the store, set the brake, climbed down. Orville Fenton was crossing from the bank, vest buttoned, ledger under his arm. He saw the wagon and slowed. Nathan walked to the center of the street, not to the porch, not to any one person, to the open ground where the road was widest and the dust was packed flat. Mr. Fenton. His voice carried the way a voice carries in open country flat, without echo. That letter from Ohio, was it addressed to you or to her? Fenton's mouth opened. It was addressed to the person of, was it addressed to her? No. But the community has a right to the community. Nathan looked at the street, at the blacksmith in his doorway, at the 2 men by the feed store, at the woman on the church steps. 15 people, maybe more. 2 years ago, he said. He stopped, swallowed, his thumbs pressed hard against his forefingers, the nails digging in. Ellen died. None of you came. The street was quiet. I shut the door. I know, he breathed, but this woman walked over to me when I was in the dirt. She was the only one. He stopped again. The words were harder now, coming in pieces. Her daddy's crops failed, so he threw her out. Nathan looked at Fenton. And now you read a stranger's letter and tell this town she's a curse. Fenton's ledger shifted under his arm. He did not speak. My horse spooked at a snake. Your well dropped because it hasn't rained since July. Nathan's voice went quiet. Since she came, my boy talks again. A pause. He looked at the ground, then up. She's my family. He turned, walked back to the wagon, climbed up, picked up the reins. He did not look at Fenton, did not look at the street. 2 men near the feed store exchanged a glance and looked away. The woman on the church steps went back to her sweeping. But Maggie stood in the doorway of the store, arms crossed over her apron, and she gave a single nod, small, private, and went inside. Clara sat beside him, hands in her lap, looking straight ahead. Her jaw was set. Her eyes were wet, but nothing had fallen. Nathan turned the mule north. The wagon rolled. The town fell behind them. Halfway home, Clara's hand moved from her lap and came to rest on the bench between them. Not reaching, not asking, just there. Nathan shifted the reins to his left hand. His right hand came down on the bench beside hers. Not touching, close enough to feel the warmth. They rode like that, the mule's hooves marking time on the packed dirt. The mesa turning gold in the full morning sun all the way back to the ranch, where a 5-year-old boy sat on the porch step in his nightshirt, the quilt around his shoulders, 3 white pebbles lined up on the railing beside him, waiting. Eli did not wait on the step. The wagon was still rolling when he came off the porch, bare feet slapping packed dirt, nightshirt flapping at his knees. The quilt left behind on the railing where he had been sitting. He crossed the yard at a run and hit Clara at the waist before she had both boots on the ground. His arms locked around her, his face pressed into the fabric of her dress. The force of him rocked her back half a step, and her hand caught the wagon wheel, and then both arms came down around him, and she pulled him in and held on. He was shaking. Not crying, the shaking came from somewhere below crying. From the place in a child's body where the things too large for words get stored. His fists bunched the back of her dress. His knuckles dug into her spine. She knelt in the dirt and pressed her cheek against the top of his head dust. Soap. Sun-warmed cotton, and held him until the shaking slowed. Until his grip loosened from desperation to something that was simply unwilling to let go. Nathan stood by the wagon. He watched. Then he unhitched the mule, led it to the water trough, and went to the barn. Clara carried Eli inside. She warmed the cold coffee on the stove and made cornbread from the last of the meal, the batter thin, the bread flat. But Eli ate 2 pieces, and Nathan ate 3 when he came in from the barn, and neither of them remarked on what it lacked. Eli had moved his chair. Not by much, 6 inches, maybe 8, but the gap between his seat and Clara's was gone. He ate with his left hand. His right hand rested on the bench beside her leg, his fingers touching the fabric of her skirt, not gripping, just there. Nathan finished eating and pushed back from the table and went outside. Clara heard the barn door slide open, then sounds she had not heard before from that direction, the rasp of a saw blade through pine, the rhythmic shave of a draw knife, the tap of a mallet on a wooden peg. Steady, purposeful work, not fence repair, not tack mending, something else. She washed the dishes, dried them, set them on the shelf. She swept the floor and shook the broom over the porch railing and stopped. There, beside Nathan's chair, the single chair that had been on this porch since the day she arrived. The chair that had held one person, and one person only, and declared by its solitude that one was all there would ever be, sat a second chair. New, the wood pale and rough, not yet darkened by weather. Pine, she could smell it from 5 feet away, sharp and green and alive. The seat was flat, hand-planed, the legs square and sturdy and slightly uneven. The front left a fraction shorter so the chair rocked a 1/4 inch when she pressed the back. The joints were pegged, not nailed. The surface had not been sanded. Whoever built it had put his care into the bones of the thing and left the skin for later, or for never. Clara sat down. The wood was rough under her palms. The The grain caught on the skin of her forearms where she rested them. She could feel every ridge, every place where the draw knife had not quite smoothed the surface. It was not comfortable. It was not beautiful. It was a chair, built in an afternoon by a man who did not waste words, placed beside his own without explanation. Nathan came around the corner of the cabin, sawdust on his forearms, a streak of pine resin on his jaw below his right ear. He looked at her in the chair. He sat down in his, the old one. The runners settled against the porch boards with a low creak. They sat. The valley opened in front of them, red dirt going amber in the late light, dry grass catching the sun sideways, the mesa turning from brown to copper as the afternoon thinned, crickets winding up in the sage. A quail called from the fence post. 2 sharp notes, repeated, then silence. Neither spoke, on the road below. Visible through the gap in the fence line, a small wagon moved toward the ranch, too small to be a delivery, too slow to be anyone in a hurry. It came up the track and stopped at the gate, and a boy of about 12 climbed down and set something on the gatepost and climbed back up and turned the wagon around and left without a wave or a word. Nathan walked down and came back with a paper sack, inside a tin of honey, a small bag of white sugar, and a folded cloth napkin with no note attached. He set it on the porch railing between them. Clara recognized the napkin. She had seen it in Maggie's store, tucked in the display case behind the counter, the one Maggie said she kept for a special occasion. Neither of them mentioned it. Nathan sat back down. The chair creaked beneath him. The honey and sugar sat on the railing in the fading light. The evening came. Clara lit the lamp in Eli's room and turned the wick low. The boy was already in bed, the quilt pulled up to his chest, the burn mark near his right hand where it always fell. She sat on the edge of the mattress and smoothed the hair from his forehead. His eyes were open, watching her, and in them was something she had not seen before, not the flat guarded gaze of the first week, not the tentative watching of the second. Steady, settled, the look of a child who has decided something and will not be moved from it. "Mama." The word came easier now, the hinge opening wider. He reached up and his small hand found her wrist and his fingers wrapped around it. "Don't go." 2 words, simple, the kind of words a child says 100 times a day in 100 ordinary houses. But Eli said them the way a man says a prayer, low, deliberate, with everything he had behind them. Clara leaned down, pressed her lips to his forehead. His skin was warm and smooth and smelled of soap she had bathed him before supper. Kneeling beside the tin washtub, pouring water from the chipped pitcher, while he sat still and let her. "Mama's here," she said. "Mama's not going anywhere." His grip loosened, his eyes closed, his hand slipped from her wrist and came to rest on the quilt. Palm up. Fingers curled, Clara stood, turned the lamp down to a blue thread of flame. Walked to the doorway. Nathan stood in the hall, leaning against the wall, arms crossed, head down. He did not look up when she came out. He stayed like that still, breathing, and then he straightened and walked to the front of the cabin, and she heard the porch door open and the creak of his chair, and then nothing. She followed. They sat on the porch in the dark. The stars were thick and close. A coyote called from somewhere beyond the mesa. A long, thin sound that rose and broke and faded. Nathan's coffee cup sat on the railing. Empty. Clara's hands rested in her lap. Neither of them said a word about the morning, about the wagon, about the street in Copper Bend, or the things he had said there. They sat the way two people sit, who have come through something together and do not yet have the language for what it was. In the morning, Clara opened the front door, and the September light hit her full in the face, warm, gold, carrying the smell of dry grass and the first faint edge of autumn underneath. 3 chairs on the porch. The third was small, lower than the others, pine, like the second, rough and unfinished, the pegs showing at the joints. It sat between the 2 larger chairs, centered in the gap, built sometime between midnight and dawn by a man who did not sleep, who worked by lantern light in a barn while the house rested, who measured the height of a 5-year-old boy from memory and cut the legs to fit. Eli came out behind her. He saw it, crossed the porch in 3 quick steps and climbed on. His feet reached the floor just barely. His toes pressing the boards, he settled into the seat, looked left at Clara's chair, right at where Nathan's sat, then out at the valley, the grass going gold, the fence line sharp in the early light, the mesa catching the first full sun of the day. Nathan came out with 2 tin cups, coffee, hot, the steam rising thin in the cool air. He handed one to Clara. Their fingers touched around the warm metal briefly, the way a match touches kindling. He sat. She sat. Eli sat between them. The coffee was strong and black. A meadowlark sang from the cottonwood stump. The mule shifted in the corral, its hooves scuffing dirt. Far out on the mesa, a line of light worked its way down the red rock face, inch by inch, the way September moves unhurried, carrying warmth it has no intention of releasing yet. Clara drank, felt the heat in her chest, the boy's shoulder against her arm, the rough pine boards beneath her feet, solid and real. Later, after breakfast, after Nathan walked to the barn with Eli trailing behind him, carrying a stick and dragging it through the dirt in long wandering lines, Clara went to the kitchen. She washed the cups, dried them, set them on the shelf, on the window ledge where the morning sun came through strongest. 4 white pebbles sat in a row. The 4th was smaller than the others, rounder, placed at the end of the line with the same careful intention as the first 3 set there by small hands in the early light, while no one was watching. Clara stood at the window. She did not touch them. She looked at the 4 stones and the sun moving slow across the ledge and the dust turning in the light. She left them where they were. Sometimes a story leaves something behind that you weren't expecting. A heaviness in the chest that isn't quite sadness. A warmth that hasn't found its name yet. If that's where you are right now, sitting with something quiet and tender, I want you to know that's enough. You don't have to sort through it. You don't have to understand why it stayed. Many of us have known what it is to carry something alone for a long time. To love without being sure we were allowed to. To sit on a porch and wonder if the chair beside ours would always be empty. Some of us have been the one who almost left. Some of us have been the one who didn't know how to say stay. Whatever you felt just now, the ache, the familiar tug, the quiet, it doesn't need to be fixed or explained. It's allowed to sit with you the way a pebble sits on a window ledge. Small, ordinary, and placed there by someone who didn't need you to notice. Thank you for being here. Thank you for staying until the end.